hello everyone. It's always so good to be with you, to come together inside what I think of as the embrace of Reimagine. And I'm calling in tonight from New York City, the land of the Lenape people. And I'm at home with my daughters, who are both in their 20s, and with my mom on the call tonight. So I'm feeling very full and very grateful. I want to acknowledge this, as Brad said, since really last March, I guess, Reimagine has been hosting these monthly vigils to mourn and remember those lost to COVID. And also to highlight some of the other difficult and poignant challenges that we all face as individuals, as a nation, as a world. And even as the vaccines roll out, for example, we know that this pandemic is not over. We've seen horrific numbers and hardship coming out of India over the last couple of weeks, and Brazil, and hotspots here in the US. And we know also, of course, that people of color, women and moms in particular, have borne a disproportionate burden of this crisis, as they've lost jobs, lost income, homeschooled their kids, cared for sick ones. So with our vigil falling on Mother's Day this month, I'm so touched to be a part of this. And as Brad said, we've chosen to really shine the light on women tonight, to honor and celebrate what is most precious and most beautiful about being a woman, a daughter, a sister, a lover, a friend, and also to acknowledge the complexity of being female, whether cisgender or trans or gender fluid, and to hold space for the grief that may even be connected to Mother's Day, which many of us are honored and excited and grateful to be able to celebrate, but which also is complex for many people. And also tonight to really speak to and name the scourge of violence and violation and injustice that still affects women worldwide. So what better person to speak to this intersection of celebration and complexity of women than V, formerly known as Eve Ensler, someone who has helped women across the globe bring their complex, glorious, and excruciating truths about being female into the light and into our public discourse. I'm really looking so forward to this conversation, which will begin in just a few minutes. And I will give V a formal introduction at that time. But before that, we're going to open the vigil, the sort of formal part of our vigil, by lighting our candles. So as Brad said, if you have a candle, now is the time to reach for it. And I'm going to invite everyone to light their candles. I will do so with mine as well. And as we do, I will read this prayer aloud. And although you'll be muted, I invite you all to read along with me, so that we can, as Brad said, all have our voices and our energy out into the world together, even though my voice will be the one heard on our screen tonight. By lighting our candles in this time of pandemic, we honor our personal dead, the dead caused by racism, the dead of the world, and all of us still here together. By lighting our candles in this time of pandemic, we honor our personal dead, the dead caused by racism, the dead of the world, and all of us still here together. By lighting our candles in this time of pandemic, we honor our personal dead, the dead caused by racism, the dead of the world, and all of us still here together. And I want to invite you to, again, to take a moment to look across the screen and to see all of the other candles that are lit, and maybe even catch someone's eye, someone who you probably don't know, and just send them your deepest affection, love, connection, whatever it is that you feel you'd like to offer up into the world tonight. It's wonderful. I see people's eyes looking across the screen. So now, into this beautiful sacred space that we are all creating together, it is my pleasure to introduce V. When we think of people over the last century who have truly tackled the challenging topics and taboos, we would definitely put V at the top of that list. Formerly known as Eve Ensler, V is the Tony Award-winning playwright, activist, and author of the global theatrical phenomenon, the Vagina Monologues. V is the founder of V-Day, a global activist movement which has raised over $100 million to end violence against all women and girls, cisgender, transgender, gender fluid, across the globe. She's also the founder of 1 Billion Rising, the largest global mass action to end gender-based violence in over 200 countries, and the co-founder of City of Joy. It's what sounds like an extraordinary and revolutionary center for women survivors of violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Her recent book, The Apology, which has been called transfixing, revelatory, and cathartic, is written from the point of view of her dead father, who violently abused her throughout childhood. The book is, as V writes in her dedication, for every woman still waiting for an apology. Never resting for a moment, however, it seems that amidst the pandemic last fall, V also presented That Kindness Nurses in Their Own Words, a docuplay based on powerful interviews with these, quote, radical angels of the heart that were working on the front lines of care and activism during the pandemic. So V, it is a true honor to welcome you here tonight and to meet you and to welcome you to Reimagine. Thank you so much for being here tonight with us.
Thank you. I am so honored, humbled, privileged to be in the presence of you, Jeannie, and all the beautiful people on this call. And I just want to say, I too am speaking from sacred Lenape land and feel so privileged to walk on this land every day. And I so deeply thank our Indigenous sisters and brothers for the way they have stewarded this land and kept us here all this time.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So as we're just getting started, and as we gather tonight to both mourn lives lost and lives changed by COVID, and to honor and explore the lives of women in gender and gender-based violence, I want to ask you if you're willing to share maybe who or what are you holding in your heart tonight?
Wow, a lot, actually. I think, one of the advantages and one of the intensities of being part of a worldwide movement is that you're always knowing or often knowing what's happening in a lot of places at the same time. And that can be both blissful, but usually it's very overwhelming. So tonight I'm holding in my heart Afghanistan, where as the US withdraws after a 20-year war, women are going to be in a much worse situation than they have been, and actually probably worse off than they were 20 years ago once the US is gone. I'm holding Palestinians who are under siege tonight and having their lands taken from them. I'm holding deeply my sisters and brothers in India and in Iran, which we don't talk about, where the virus is out of control. And I'm holding, I'm holding in my heart a country, this country, that is so divided right now by our kind of argument about what is freedom and what is collective wellness and health and responsibility. And I see how we have, in my opinion, mistaken freedom sometimes in some ways for selfishness. And I dream and I call this country, and I think what I'm holding in my heart is the desire for this country to understand that at this moment in our human evolution, we are utterly interdependent. There is not one of us, our future, that is not hinged on each other's. And so every action we take individually is impacting each other every single minute. And I see that if I just look at Afghanistan, I got a letter that I put out this week from my sisters there who we support. We have a beautiful center there called City of Knowledge. And, the bombings that are there that just happened yesterday where schoolgirls were killed, people can't go to work and know that they will come home safely. It's all up for grabs every day. As a matter of fact, they told me that COVID is like a mosquito. compared to the lions that they're up against every day. And we as Americans created that war. We as Americans spent $2.26 trillion on that war. 250,000 people are dead, and we don't know why. We don't know what we've done. So these are the things I'm holding in my heart tonight. I could go on, but I also am holding in my heart that there are places like this space, and there are so many beautiful people on this planet who are in movements, particularly women who are leading those movements. Every major movement in the world is being led by women right now, who are rising up, whether it's Black Lives Matter or Say Her Name, or the Sunrise climate change movement, or just go around the world, or 1 Billion Rising. It's women everywhere who, in the face of inordinate obstacles and impossibilities, are still keeping centers open in Kabul, right? Are still going forward in India to take care of people and feed people and house people, or in the Philippines, which is undergoing serious COVID. My sisters, the Gabriella sisters, are on the streets every day feeding the people and making sure people are surviving. So both these things are happening simultaneously all the time. And I'm also holding our Mother Earth in my heart. I see the spring, and I see the generosity, and I see the beauty, and I see the radiance of what she is offering us. And I see how we have not woken yet to those gifts, to that incredible life that we should be just in complete awe of every day, and making sure we protect her and cherish her, and all the ways that we are devastating her capacity to keep us here, on the planet.
Well, thank you for sharing that beautiful and challenging array of things that you're holding in your heart, from the polarity and the confusion of what it means to be American at this moment, to the true life and death situations of millions of people worldwide, and our planet itself. And I'll share with you that I had an experience a couple of years ago in a deep meditation, where I was in a state of complete exhaustion, complete depletion. And I had, in a very deep way, an identification with what we are doing to our planet, that we are literally sucking her dry. And it brings me really to the depth of the understanding that you've had around women in general, who are so often depleted as the caregivers, as the doers, as the ones holding the lists, as the ones going out to really protect and fiercely defend what is needed for their children often. So I wanted to just maybe begin with a few words about the Vagina Monologues, which of course was a global phenomenon. As I said earlier, the Times said in 1996, when you first introduced this to the world, no recent hour of theater has had a greater impact worldwide. I will say, as a proud mama, even I got to see one of my daughters performing My Revolution Begins in the Body when she was in college a few years ago. That was a thrill. And I just wanted to ask you, when you think about what inspired this work, how did you know what it was going to become? Did you have a sense? What were you hoping for? Has it surprised you? Tell us a little bit about what it's been like to sort of give birth to this.
Well, no, I had no idea. I mean, I really think my first performance at this wonderful little theater downtown called Here, my prayer was that I would get through it without passing out and anybody shooting me. That was my prayer. And it's so funny. I was looking at the thing you posted at the beginning about taboos, fear, bringing fear into trust, and it completely applies. I mean, it was a very similar process. And I think I think what motivated me, to be honest with you, is curiosity, which is usually what motivates me in just about any artistic endeavor that I start with. It's like, I need to know more, and something's bothering me or something's disturbing me, and I want to go deeper and deeper to understand it. And the truth of the matter is, I was talking to a lovely older woman who was a feminist and a forward-thinking woman, and she was going through menopause, and she was actually a very funny woman, and she just was describing her vagina, and she was like, it's dried up, it's finished, it's dead. You know, she was a New Yorker, and she was like, I don't even want to look at it. It's like a prune. And I was like, oh my God. I was like shocked that someone was talking about their vagina like that. So I started to think to myself, well, I don't really know what women think about their vaginas. I have no idea. So I would just casually say to a friend, what do you think about your vagina? And first of all, I've never met a woman who didn't want to answer that question. It's like it opens a door and then it goes on for days. But the first woman said to me, my mother used to tell me, don't wear underwear, don't wear underpants underneath your pajamas. You need to air out your pussycat. And oh my God. And that was really the beginning. I realized I had just stumbled in, like it was really Pandora's box. The stories, the memories, and that really began this journey. But I don't think I had any intention of writing a play, because I was already a way downtown playwright. I was writing plays about homeless women and nuclear war and all the things people don't want to come and hear about. And and I'm writing a play about a Vagina Monologues would, in my mind, have secured my status as a way downtown playwright. But I interviewed this older woman who told me that she had had an experience as a child, a young woman with a guy who humiliated her around her sexuality, and she had never had sex again. And I just couldn't believe that this woman in her 70s had never had sex again. Like the idea of a life without sex, like is a life without life, right? And I just thought, how could this be possible? And then I decided I need to write a play about this, because it was clear to me that something had gone terribly wrong, right? And that we needed to address it. And I think after I made that decision, then what I would do is I would interview, I interviewed hundreds and hundreds of women, maybe 200 women, and then I would just listen and I would let it wash over me. And then I would begin to create fictional pieces where I would take themes that I'd heard or, ideas, and then I would create characters, and eventually this started to grow into the Vagina Monologues.
Thank you for bringing us into the origin of that you didn't set out to
No,
create.
No, not at all.
Unfolded. And I actually want to continue this theme for a minute about bringing the unspeakable into our lives, because as you said, that's exactly what we're doing at Reimagine. Some folks in the field like to say, nobody wants to talk about death and dying, but everybody's thinking about it. And so I've had a very similar experience, which is that when we open the door, in fact, people have lots to say. But I think there are many on this call tonight who maybe aren't blessed with your, depth of curiosity and creative gifts, but who also really want to swim against the tide in some way. Maybe it's around death and dying, maybe it's around vaginas, maybe it's around how to break other taboos in their own lives. And I wonder what thoughts and guidance you might share to us to think about how do we fiercely speak about the unspeakable?
I love that question so much. And I love what you're doing so much, because I really do think that death, sex, vaginas, I can go down the list, apologies. There are so many things that are taboo in our culture. Talking about poop, for example, nobody talks about it, but it's the center of our life, right? And if you ever get really sick, which I did 11 years ago, it becomes your whole life, right? So I think from my point of view, I grew up in what appeared to be an upper middle class family. My father was the head of a corporation. My mother was beautiful. They were like Doris Day and Cary Grant. Everybody idolized them. And inside my family, inside the house, was hell on earth, right? It was, my father was an alcoholic. He was constantly beating me, almost murdering me. He sexually abused me as a child over and over. It was a nightmare. And what I couldn't understand as a child is how it was possible that the split between what people were talking about and what was real was such an immense divide. And for me, I now know, because I'm working on a collection of my work over 40 years, and I see how my obsession has been closing this divide, talking about what's really happening, talking about what's really in front of us, naming what's really in front of us, because in fact, that is the work that allows us to come into our bodies, come into ourselves, and come into community in a way that is authentic and transformative. And unless that happens, we keep perpetuating this false idea of ourselves, and we keep perpetuating oppressions, violences, denigrations. By not talking about but death, we don't prepare for death. It's the biggest act of our life. It's the big deal. It's where we're headed. And yet to talk about it in this culture is so frowned upon. All I want to do is talk about death. I think it's the most interesting subject in the world. And yet those are the things that we are told we're not allowed to speak of. So for me, I think I have a rule, which is if you are afraid to talk about something, that is the thing you must address. If you're afraid to write it, that is what you must write. If you're, and suffer the consequences, because there are always consequences. People don't like it when you talk about those things. People, there's never been a city, there's never been a country where I first went and they were like, oh my God, we're so happy the vaginas are here. That has just never happened. But what I have learned is once you break that silence, once you open that door, you've opened the floodgates. And suddenly people get braver. Suddenly people get more open. Suddenly people begin to tell stories. When I started to interview people and word got out, people would line up in the theater every night just to sign a list where they could come and be interviewed by me. I felt like Dr. Ruth for a while. I would just sit in my apartment and women after woman after woman would come in, and I realized that none of these women had ever told these stories before. Most women had never seen their vaginas before, let alone talked about them. So that I was sitting in a room where I was literally receiving it was such a profound gift. Women were giving me these stories and sharing things that just had bubbled up after watching the performance that they just needed to get out and share and process and understand. And I think that's what happens when you open the gates. You allow people to begin to say, oh my God, this happened to me when I was 5. This is the story of my life. I've never shared this. This has been controlling me. So I think one of the big functions of art is to be brave and to break those taboos so that people can begin to be authentic and tell the truth and look at the deepest experiences of their life and find a community that will hold those stories so they're not alone as they have been.
I just love your answer. I think there are many of us, and I would include myself in this, who also lived with a gap between what things looked like on the outside and what things were on the inside. I'll share with you that my own dissertation 20 years ago was called Knowing the Unspeakable, about how our bodies hold things that we cannot yet put into words. And in fact, it is exactly that mission that Reimagine is about. And I think that my own life's work is about, as you said, closing that gap. But I love also your understanding of how the arts can do that, right? Because it opens us up in a very different way. And I think at Reimagine, we've thought a lot about that and lean heavily in that as well. You mentioned apology, and I just feel like I want to go to your book, which was breathtaking. I could literally hardly breathe while I was reading it. It's so powerful. And as I said at the top, you said it's for every woman who's still waiting for an apology. So I wonder if you might share with us a little bit about the book, about what happened for you. Was there healing for you in writing this book? Is there ongoing? I think healing is lifelong. Recovering is lifelong. But I'm very curious kind of what your experience has been in the aftermath of completing that project.
The whole experience of this book was, it was really just one of the most, it was an exorcism. And, I think there's so many pieces to this. So let me begin by saying, I've been in this movement now to end violence against all women and gender diverse people for my whole life, really, since I was a conscious person, at least, and intentionally so for the last almost 25 years. And you know, women are so incredibly generous and so practical. You know, we rather than, you know, it's the movement to end violence against women becomes our movement, when in fact it's men who are violating women, right? We then take this on as our mission, when in fact we're not doing that, right? So we do this work for 70 years now, at least in this country, right? And Black women were the first to do it in this movement because they were being raped by white men. And, you know, Rosa Parks was an anti-rape activist long before she ever sat down on that bus. So this has been going on a very long time in this country, and yet, if you look at what's happened during COVID, for example, we have seen escalating violence, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's sex trafficking, whether it's the selling of children. I mean, it's endless, right? We are still living under the bell jar of patriarchy. We are still living in the mindset of patriarchy. So what happened for me is when, you know, we see these elevations in movements, we see these, like, we'll have 20 years and then we'll have the next phase, and we're now in then we had the Me Too phase. And I've lived through quite a few of these phases. And we saw all these men being exposed, and we saw all these men being called out, and some men losing their jobs, a couple men going to prison, not too many. And I'm not sure that's the solution anyway, but I'm just saying that's what we've got at this moment. And one of the things that hit me is that I hadn't seen one man publicly apologize in a thorough, deep, self-reflective, owning, self-investigatory, looking at himself, looking at his history, looking at what he'd been through, what made it, what made me this, what went into what are the ingredients in my childhood that created me as a man? What did I do? What are the detailed events and actions that I took against this woman? What did it do to her life? What was the impact on her life? What has she carried since then? And how am I going to say I'm sorry and make amends? Okay. So I've read mostly what I've seen is men feeling sorry for themselves because they've lost jobs, feeling like it was way too much. But have I seen one man go to therapy and sit down and write about what he's learned in the process of losing his job or losing his position? Not one. And I started to think, have I ever heard a man publicly apologize for sexual abuse or for hurting? And I started looking at history. Are there any men in history who have done this? And I suddenly realized, no, that has not happened. So that was one piece of it. That was a huge piece of it. The second piece was that I realized for myself, I have been waiting. My father's been dead 32 years. I waited my whole life while my father was alive. And there's a part of me that has been waiting, even if it's not logical or conscious. I've been waiting all the years that he's been dead. I go to the mailbox sometimes. It's like this unconscious thing. That letter will be there. He'll have owned it. He'll finally have said and acknowledged what he did to me, so I can release this alchemically, so I can let go of this, so that the depth of his owning what he's done to me can free me. And so I realized, you know what, that's not coming. And I decided I'm going to write his apology. I'm going to write it because I really believe in the power of art. I believe in the power of conjuring. I believe in the power of what we can do to our bodies, like how we can change our bodies by writing language that actually moves particles and elements and frees things and lets things go. So writing that book was the hardest, most painful, excruciating thing I've ever done in my life. But it actually taught me a lot about agony, the agony that the wound is the portal, right? The wound is the portal. When you walk through the wound, you get free. And what I had never allowed myself to do, because I was so raging at my father for so many years, was feel his pain, was understand what went into making him the kind of person that could do what he did, not to justify it, but to understand it. To understand it, because understanding is a pathway to release. It's a pathway to transformation. And so I climbed into my father and I let him speak through me, and I let him tell me things. And some of it was imagined, some of it was based on things I knew, some of it was just conjuring. But I do believe that we often carry things in our body. We carry knowledge, we carry intuition, we carry wisdom that is so deep in us that it's further than our conscious mind. Like, we know stuff. And so writing that book, I began to know my father. I began to see what the societal implications of patriarchy, the way it manifested in the dynamics of his family, the way it manifested in him as a man in the 50s. And then I actually got him to say and see and write all the things he had done to me, and be very detailed, because I think an apology only works in the details and the specificity. And then I got him to really feel what that had done to my life. It destroyed me for years. I couldn't think. I had no ability to be intimate. I was promiscuous and wild because I didn't think I had a right to say no in my body. He made me hate my body. All of the things that were a result of that sexual abuse, because we talk about sexual abuse, but we don't break it down and say, what does this do to one woman's life? How long does a woman have to fight and struggle and investigate and therapize and to really recover from an invasion, an unwanted invasion of somebody in her body, right? And so at the end of it, it's really, it was, and my father was there. I mean, one of the things I learned is that the dead are always around us. Our ancestors are around us. And often they are waiting. They need help. They need help. They are stuck in zones where they have done things and where they have committed acts that they cannot get free from. And they need our help to get free. And at the end of the book, there's a line at the end of the book which says, "Old man, be gone." And I don't know if my father said it, or if I said it, or if we said it, but as I wrote it, it was like, remember the end of Peter Pan when Tinkerbell just goes, shh, right? She just goes, shh. My father went, shh, and he hasn't been back. My father's gone. And I really know, my father is in a different place in the next realms than he was when we began that book. He got free. Something happened for my father. But for me, what happened was that I am free from my father. And what I mean by that is that I have no more rancor. I have no more rage. I have no more, my life was about my father, reacting to my father. Even 32 years after his death, I was going to show my father. I was going to prove it to my father. All of me was in relationship to my predator. And that's just not true anymore. And in some ways, I lost my ballast, right? Like when your whole life is a reaction to something, that's how you know yourself. And in that sense, I was my father's victim for many, many, many years, because that act was what was keeping my life motivated and driven, right? But what happened afterwards was so amazing, because I got lost for a period of months. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know what was driving my life, what the point of my life was, what the momentum was. And then I got this message, this very clear message, that I needed to change my name. I needed to release my father's last name, and I needed to release the name he gave me, because that was no longer who I was. That was another story. That was his story. That was his story. And I now needed, in this part of my life, to write my story. And when I changed my name, it was, names are so powerful. They're so powerful. The Kabbalah talks about the power of names, right? They create destinies, right? They create your pathway. And since I changed my name, I'm walking on a new highway. You know what I mean? I'm on a new highway now. And I'm very, very interested in how we teach apology, how we bring apology, reparations into every aspect of our life, whether it's reparations to the indigenous who had genocide committed against them, whose lands were stolen, whether it's apologies and reparations towards African Americans, who we know 400 years of slavery, Jim Crow, insane mass incarceration, police killings, right? Apologies towards women for the ongoing misogyny and transgender people, gay people, differently abled people. We can just go down the list. We need a global and national plan that is equivalent to a kind of psychic Marshall Plan, which would really begin to say, we are going to begin a reckoning. I mean, what has COVID shown us? All the ways we need to reckon, you know what I mean? So I spoke at Riverside Church a few weeks ago. And one of the things I said was it Riverside Church or, oh my God, the other church? It wasn't
St. John?
No, it begins with an S. Why is my brain? Anyway, it'll come back. The big church. But anyway, one of the things I said is that we teach prayer. We teach prayer. We teach about the concentration of prayer and the humility of prayer and the depth of prayer, but we do not teach apology. And somebody said, well, you know, in your choice of readings, there was nothing from the Bible. I said, there is nothing in the Bible about apology. There's writings on forgiveness, but there are no texts in the Bible because men wrote it and men were not apologizing because, in my opinion, an apology or the non-apology is one of the critical columns of patriarchy, right? Yeah. Men have been taught never to say they're sorry, never to show weakness, never to apologize. And that is what holds up patriarchy. So we are now in a period where we need brave men to come forward to begin this process of owning what they've done, talking about what they've done, and beginning to free up our culture.
I am with you 100%. I kept waiting during some of the high profile, you know, Me Too moments of the last couple of years for one of these men to come forward and actually make it a teachable moment for all of the men and young boys and frat boys across the country. And to your point, no, it hasn't happened. So I want to, first of all, I could talk to you literally all night, but I can't. So I want to take a moment to invite one of our guests who we're going to hear from more later, whose name is Mulvia Maddox, and I'll give her a fuller introduction for a moment, but she wanted to also share a question with you. So I'm going to invite Mulvia to join us for a moment.
Hi, Mulvia.
Hello, V. It's lovely to hear you. I literally send chills through me just listening to you. I have admired your work for so long. In fact, about 7 years ago, I said to a friend who's a playwright, I'd gone to help her on with her opening, and I said, I really want to write something in the style of a monologue about the taboo of a mother losing a child, and I'll talk more about that experience later. But so this, for me, feels just like synchronicity to be here with you tonight and listen. And I just found, you know, your work so incredible. It's just incredible. And to hit the taboo subject head on with that title, even, the Vagina Monologues, I mean, that feels so brave to me. And you have answered some of my question, actually, with what you've already said. But did it feel really difficult to do at the time? Were you concerned that people wouldn't allow you the opportunity to deliver this work? Were you concerned about how it would be received?
Well, yeah. You know, I think it's one of those really strange things. I think when you get possessed by something, there is a built-in protection because you're just kind of single focused. So I was possessed, but I'll tell you a really great story because I really believe there were vagina angels around me from the time this thing began, and just these brave, amazing people who got what I was doing and were part of it. There was nobody who brought Vagina Monologues to their city or country that wasn't as equally important to what I was doing as me, right? Because they were the people who were bringing it into their community. They were the brave ones who were saying, I'm going to bring this in here. And And I saw people do things that they couldn't believe they could do themselves, because they needed to do it for their own liberation and because of what had happened to them on their own journey. But very early on, there was this amazing woman, and very straight, very proper woman from Oklahoma City. Okay. And she came to see the show in New York, and she was like, I'm going to bring this to Oklahoma City. And I was like, are you sure you want to bring this to Oklahoma City? She goes, I'm going to bring you. And at the beginning, after I did it in New York, it was just very random. Somebody said, I'm going to bring you to Jerusalem. And somebody said, I'm going to bring you to Santa Barbara. And somebody said, I'm going to bring you. It was just arbitrary where I would end up. So this woman said, I'm going to bring you to Oklahoma. And I said, all right, let's see how that goes, you know? So I go to Oklahoma City. I'm literally performing in a warehouse with a light bulb over my head. And she's waiting to see if anyone from the community is going to show up. Okay. So the first night, she's got, I don't know, maybe 100 chairs, right? And people show up. And as I'm performing, a young woman faints in the audience. Everyone stops. The woman gets up and she says out loud, oh my God, my stepfather raped me. She was in that community. Everyone in the community breaks down sobbing. Everyone takes care of her. Everyone hugs her. Everyone embraces her. Everyone gives space for that story to be known and held in the community. And then I continue the show. The next day, people pulled up in their trucks with lawn chairs to see the show. And I knew then that something was happening that was way beyond me, that whatever it is that the Vagina Monologues has been about, my role was to be a conduit and to serve this energy, which I believe is the critical energy that must come back to the planet if we are going to survive as a species. That what patriarchy did to women, whenever this started, is that we were free, sexual, awake, intuitive, connected beings who lived in our bodies, who actually had incredible wisdom and abilities to be connected to not only our vaginas, but to the earth. And when patriarchy came through its violence, through its oppression, through its hierarchy, through its occupations, it annihilated, it repressed, it shut down, it cauterized that sexuality. And we are still trying to get it back. So I feel honestly that doing the Vagina Monologues, being part of this whole journey, has been the greatest honor, the greatest privilege that I have learned and grown, hopefully to serve better and better as I go. And really that the liberation of that feminine, that sexuality, that spirit is what will in fact transform human consciousness. I know that as I know anything else in this world. So I think once I tapped into that, I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't like being judged. I didn't like people who attacked me in reviews. It didn't feel great, but I didn't care anymore. It was like, it's so much bigger than that. You know, of course you're going to attack me. Do you think patriarchy liked me talking about vaginas and saying that women had a right to their sexuality, to look at their vaginas, to know their vaginas, to feel good about their vaginas? No, of course they don't want that. They want women to be disconnected from themselves and disembodied and disempowered, right? So it's a much bigger fight than me, right?
Thank you.
Mulvia, thank you for that beautiful question. We'll see you again in a few minutes. And V, I have one last question for you, and it actually comes out of exactly the story that you just shared and the answer that you gave to Mulvia. I actually want to talk about Mother's Day. Because Mother's Day is, yes, it's a time to celebrate, to honor the women who have cared for us. Some of us have been really lucky. I happen to have a mother who's on the call who's been fiercely loving and my champion my whole life. Not everybody is so fortunate, as we know. And we also know that Mother's Day was declared, in 1914 by the President of the United States as some sort of national reification of a particular version of women and mothers. And that in fact, many women have very different experiences. They've had to reinvent even what it means to be a woman or a mother based on the terrible experiences that they've grown up with. So in the context of reckoning, of telling the truth, of being able to really come into an authentic relationship with ourselves as women, with our mothers, whatever kind of mother we had or have been, I wonder if you could talk to us about your thoughts on motherhood on this day in particular, and how it is that we could find an honest relationship to our mothers and to ourselves in the context of a culture which still holds up this kind of aversion of the
Mhm.
non-truth.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one.
And I know we only have a couple of minutes, and it's a huge question, but I just couldn't let the night go without asking you.
It's very interesting. Today is the first time I've ever put out a picture of my mother on Instagram. And I think one of the reasons I was able to is because since I moved to the woods, I feel completely embraced, loved, held, and aligned with the Divine Mother, right? With Mother Earth. And so I feel completely full. I feel loved in all. I'm loved by trees. I'm loved by water. I'm loved by birds. I'm held here. I don't need anything anymore. So I don't have to feel bad about what I didn't get from my own mother, right?
Yeah.
And I really get who my mother was. I get what generation she grew up in. First of all, I just want to say this mandate for women to have to be mothers, literal mothers, to have children, just needs to end. There are many of us, I didn't want to have babies. I had no desire for babies. And you couldn't talk about that. You can't even say that out loud. It isn't what I was drawn to do. And I think that's true for a lot of women, right? I think this push to be somebody or not, I think motherhood is the hardest, most difficult task you can choose to do. I don't think anything is harder than it to do it well. I think you have to feel it like an artist. You have to feel it in your bones that you have the desire for it, the commitment to it, the ability to make it work, to think deeply about your children, to go. And if you don't have it, I think you should think seriously about whether you want to do that, right? There are plenty of things to do in this world as women. That's number one. Number two, this idea that there are only one form of mothering, right? I'm a proud stepmother. I adopted my son many years ago. And I have to say, all you have to say to somebody is, I'm your mother. Remember that book, Are You My Mother? Like that children's book. The minute you say to someone, I'm your mother, projection happens, bingo, you're their mother, and all the dynamics begin, right? So I've been my son's mother for over 40 years. It's been one of the greatest joys of my life. But I also feel there are many ways I have mothered in this world. And there's no woman I've met who isn't mothering in some capacity. So the fact that we value some forms of mothering over other forms, I find very problematic. And I think we have to expand our notion. I look to the Divine Mother, how she mothers. She creates beauty. She creates life. Just look at all the ways around us that we see the Divine Mother's divinity revealed. And I look at women in the same way. Mothering is the Gab women in the Philippines going out into the slums and making sure women are revolutionized and know their rights, right? Mothering is, I look at Cori Bush, who's a congresswoman who I just adore, who was a battered woman, who was a nurse, who went through unbelievable odds. And yet she cared so much for her community. She was one of the leaders of the Ferguson Black Lives Matter movement. She mothered that community, and now she's mothering in Congress. We all mother differently, and I think men have to learn how to mother. What is mothering? It's nurturing. It's standing by people. It's being in solidarity with people. It's planting. It's bringing possibility to people so that they can move forward, and seeing the best in people so they can rise to that. And we all have to be mothers, every single one of us. And we have to be responsive and open and in service to our great mother, who is calling us to really wake up.
to really wake up. It's true. Well, I thank you for this beautiful set of stories and answers, and for holding us, for embracing and kind of being our mother for this evening of reckoning and of honesty, of transformation. It's been such an honor to talk with you as one of Reimagine's founders. I can tell you in our 4 years, this is a highlight for all of us.
Thank you.
I know I speak for millions, truly, when I express very deep gratitude for your brilliance and your insights and for the truth and how you bring it to us in such powerful ways. So thank you, V, for being you and for being with us here tonight.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you for your wonderful, wonderful dialogue. And thank you, Malvia, for your incredible question. And thank you for the incredible work you're doing. This is the work. This is the work that is mothering, is reshaping consciousness, you know?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I feel like I want to just take a deep breath and invite everyone to breathe in the wisdom and the joy and the energy of this wonderful conversation as we turn now to our honor ceremony. I think as you're starting to see in the chat, many people are starting to, including my own mother who writes, "This has been inspirational." Thank you, Nancy Pats. People are starting to comment on their gratitude for V. And so I encourage anyone to do that. As we turn to the honor ceremony, we're going to call up in our hearts those whom we are here to honor tonight, or if it is a place, as V said, Afghanistan or other places in your heart that you are holding up tonight, please feel free to do so when the time comes. I want to now, with joy, introduce Dr. Soo-Yeon Pak, who's a personal friend and a colleague who will lead us in this ceremony. Sue is the Senior Director and Associate Professor of Integrative and Field-Based Education at Union Theological Seminary here in New York. She has championed Reimagine's work from its beginnings and serves on our advisory council. Her work supports students and faculty at Union engaged with the clinical pastoral education and chaplaincy work. She is also a spiritual director. Her life and research passions include contemplative traditions, the spiritual life of the elderly, women's leadership, criminal justice, and integrative and critical pedagogies. And she has a newly published book called Sisters in Mourning, Daughters Reflecting on Care, Loss, and Meaning, co-edited with another personal friend and colleague, Rabbi Michael Springer. And just a little heads up, on May 20th, Sue and her co-authors will be appearing on Reimagine's Holding Space series, and you'll hear more about that later. So it's my pleasure now to welcome Dr. Soo-Yeon Pak. Sorry.
Thank you, Jenny. I don't know how to follow what just happened, so I'm just taking it all in. So I would invite all of us to just settle in our body. We talked a lot about our bodies. Settle in our body and take a deep breath to be present here together. On this Mother's Day, we honor, we remember, and we mourn mothers who have given birth to us, mothers we have chosen, and mothers who have chosen us. Mothers who are separated at the borders, in prisons, due to state-sanctioned violence, and during this pandemic. We see you for witnessing life amidst destruction, for fierce tenderness, for your embodied wisdom that you share, for imperfections and fractures that you live boldly, so that we too can boldly and lovingly hold our own imperfections and fractures. On this Mother's Day, we honor, we remember, and we mourn those who have gone before us, life cut short due to gender-based violence, women and girls who are commodified and used as collateral damage of the capitalized, militarized, warring systems, those whose lives are incarcerated, trafficked, and denied sexual and reproductive rights and services, the trans women of color who disproportionately face systemic socioeconomic discrimination and physical violence, We also remember those who face race and gender-based violence day to day in their schools, workplaces, in public and in private, both in the US and around the world. On this Mother's Day, in the Asian American Heritage Month of May, we honor, we remember, and we mourn the victims of the Atlanta area shooting and the virulent ongoing anti-Asian violence that targets Asian women and the elderly. And we witness and stand with people in India who are going through unimaginable pandemic atrocity, with sickness and death at every door, every house, and every street. On this Mother's Day, we honor, we remember, and we mourn our common fragile home, our Mother Earth, that we have borrowed from our future generations. The ecological devastation that destroys the ecosystem, depleting us of air, water, soil, biodiversity, extinction of wildlife, deforestation, and a way of life. So in this time of insurmountable grief, I find solace in a poem called The Earth, written by Ubiri, who was a Buddhist nun and a mother grieving the death of her daughter, Jiva. This poem is from the Therigatha, an ancient Buddhist text, which is considered to be the oldest collection of women's literature composed in India. This version is a poetic translation by Maddie Weingast. The Earth. How many days and nights did I wander the woods calling your name? Jiva, my daughter. Jiva, my heart. Late one night, finally exhausted, I fell to the ground. Oh, my heart, I heard a voice say, 84,000 daughters, all named Jiva, have died and been buried here in this boundless cemetery you call a world. For which of these Jivas are you mourning? Lying there on the ground, I shared my grief with those 84,000 mothers, and they shared their grief with me. Somehow, I found myself healed, not of grief, but of the immeasurable loneliness that attends grief. My sisters, those of you who have known the deepest loss, as you cry out in the wilderness, just make sure you stop every so often to listen for a voice calling back. As we set our intention to honor, remember, and mourn today, we lend our ears to listen for that voice calling back. Tonight, we celebrate the voice of resilience, strength, love, healing, compassion, freedom, beauty, and bravery. When the music begins, I invite you to offer the names and places you wish to call into this space. In the chat box, put their names, your relationship to them, and a message you wish to convey. Aditi Sethi will sing a Sanskrit chant to the Divine Mother during this collective ritual of honoring.
Jai
Thank you, Aditi, for that beautiful music, and Sue for your profound words of tribute and recognition. And thank you to everyone for the messages, for the names that you've shared, and for holding this profound space of love and loss. Each month that we host this vigil, I see names sometimes repeat, and of course, many new names. And I'm reminded of the scope of the loss that we have suffered over these last months and the incredible task we have ahead of us to continue to heal. I'm also reminded of the depth and the power of love. And as V said, those who are lost are still with us in powerful ways. And those relationships continue in powerful ways. And it's so moving to feel that in the words and messages that you've shared. So thank you everyone for that. I want to now invite Mulvia Maddox back to share some words and lead us in extinguishing our candles. By way of background, Mulvia is first and foremost a mother and a nurturer as well as an author. Her perspective on life and death was altered forever when her daughter Christy, at the age of 9, was diagnosed with Friedreich's ataxia, a degenerative neurological disease. She refused to accept society's assumptions and classifications of people who live with impairment or disability. And in fact, Christy lived fully until her death at age 29 in April of 2019. Her legacy lives on in the book that Mulvia has written, Perfectly Flawed, and in the organization she founded, Melting Ice Cubes, which is a resource that empowers individuals and their caregivers to gather information and connect with others living with disabilities and chronic illness. So as a way to invite Mulvia, I hope that you will now join us, Mulvia.
Yeah. Did you want me to tell my story now?
Yes, please.
So I wasn't a stranger to death, actually. When I was 7, my brother died. He was 5, and that was in 1969. And there was no counselling in those days. We were not invited to the funeral as his siblings, which I found really, really hard. And then going back to school after the funeral, and children in the playground asking him, is Andrew coming to play? And constantly having to tell people that he was gone. But as life does, it carries on, and I grew up, and the impact that it had on me was that I never felt safe. You know, I remember thinking as a small child, well, if my brother could die and he was 5, then so can my parents. And I really felt a responsibility to be really careful about what I did and said to other people, because I knew that life was just not guaranteed. And it really put a serious lens on my life, I think, that maybe I shouldn't have had. And then when I grew up and I had my own family, I was always scared. I always wanted them to get past the milestone age in my head of age 5. And when they got past that, you know, I felt a sense of relief. And so, you know, we arrive at 1990 and I've got 2 little boys, and I have my 3rd child, a daughter, Christy. I felt so blessed to have her. I was delighted to welcome a little girl into our family. And she was a bright, sparky little madam. She ruled the roost. She bossed her brothers about. She was cheerful, bright, sparky. But it was mother's intuition that I felt that there was something wrong. And almost imperceptible things that perhaps nobody else would see, but I saw. And so I took her to the doctors and got her referred to consultants at age 2. And they assured me there was nothing wrong with her. I took her back when she was 3. I took her back when she was 4. And now they just turned their attention to me, really, and said that I was an over-anxious mom, that I'd been through a divorce and I was too focused on my little girl, And I really began to get very worried that people were going to perhaps take her away from me. And so I stopped going. I stopped going to doctors and just worried on my own, because things were getting worse with Christy and I didn't feel that I could tell anybody anymore. Fast forward again to 1998, and I had remarried and had my fourth child, but had been quite poorly in this pregnancy, and so had been in hospital for 10 weeks. And when I came home with a little boy, I saw Christy walking across the room, and my goodness, was this child stumbling now. And when they came to see the baby, the community visitors, I said, look, I'm not really worried about the baby. He's absolutely fine now, but just watch Christy walk. And yet again, this lady says to me, oh, Mulvia, you know, Christy's always been a little bit small and she's always been delicate compared to her brothers, but she's just a girl, that's all, you know, don't worry about it, she's fine. And so again, I did nothing. And then a few months passed and I decided that this little girl, who seemed to be more than stumbly, she couldn't run properly anymore. She wasn't learning to swim. And I thought, she has to learn to swim. You know, this could be a lifesaver. You know, she needs to know how to swim. So I took her for swimming lessons. And at the end of her first lesson, this lady comes to me and grabs me and says, what's the matter with your daughter? I said, oh, whoa, you know, there's nothing wrong with my daughter. And she said, well, she was really trembling. And I said, oh, yes, she does do that actually. And I have taken her to doctors, but they've told me there's nothing wrong. And she said, you've got to take her back. And I looked at the lady and I said, yes, I will take her. And so I did go back to the doctors and I said, please watch Christy walk. You know, I do think there is something wrong. And this time he could see how stumbly she was. And so I get referred to hospital. And this time they can't find any reflexes. And I hear them muttering and whispering, and I hear the word ataxic walk. And then they say that I need to go home with Christy and that I need to come back in a week's time and she has to have an MRI. And so I dutifully take her back and she climbs onto the MRI scanning table. And as I sit there, I'm thinking, they're looking for a brain tumour. And I really wanted them to find one. I really did, because I thought, if she doesn't have a brain tumour, my daughter has something really obscure. And so when they'd finished, I ushered Christy off to her stepfather and I cornered the scanner and I said, please excuse me, you know, I just need you to tell me, did you see a brain tumour? Look at me, I'm not going to cry, I'm not going to break down, but I just need to know. And she looked at me, she summed me up, and then she said, I didn't see a tumour. And I thanked her and we went home. And I dropped Christy with my husband and him to be at home with the children while I dashed up to the library. I mean, this was a long time ago. And I pulled all the reference books up in the medical section and just kept looking up ataxic walk. And eventually I came across some genetic illnesses. So I go back home, homework, tea time, wash up, bed, pack bags for the next day. And then at about 11 o'clock that night, I sat down to open Ask Jeeves. That's how long ago it was. And I scrolled through search after search and came across an American family. And all I needed to do was change the name of that child. All the obscure little things that I had noticed, they had too. And he had an illness called Friedreich's ataxia. And I researched that more. And the next day I called the hospital and said, could I speak to the consultant, and asked if they were checking for this condition called Friedreich's ataxia. The secretary said that the consultant was not available, but they would get back to me later, which they did. And the consultant said, Mulvia, I can't tell you what Christy has. She has something obscure, but the blood results have been sent off. I've ordered a genetic screen and you will find out in a few weeks. But I knew, I knew she had Friedreich's ataxia. And sure enough, about 6 or 7 weeks later, I get a call. It was a Thursday night. I was washing up, actually drying dishes, and the phone went, and it was the consultant. And she said, Mulvia, I'm really sorry to tell you that Christy does have Friedreich's ataxia. And I said, it's okay. It's been like waiting for a bus. I knew it was going to come. It's okay. And I remember washing and drying up the dishes and thinking, Friedreich's ataxia, that terrible illness. You know, I had researched it. I knew. I knew the writing on the wall and how her life was going to be changed forever. But as a mom, I didn't feel that I had the time or the space to get on board a bus that was full of grief and fear, because Christy's life I knew was now going to be short. And so what I needed to do was help her live it, you know, not take away my daughter's hope and her dreams. And I remember sitting with this little girl who was just so full of life. And I remember talking to her about her condition. And she asked me, you know, why they'd been checking her hands. And I said, well, why do you think they were checking your hands, Christy? And she said, well, I know that this illness, you've said it makes my legs stumbly, but I didn't think it would touch my hands. I want to be an artist. How can I be an artist if I can't paint? And, you know, she was upset. And that really set us up for a conversation where I said to her, Christy, none of us know what life brings. None of us. There are people who believe that they're fit and healthy and they will leave the house tomorrow morning and they'll never return. They could have a car accident. They could be in a train crash, a bus crash. They could walk past somebody in the street and pick up a virus like meningitis or something and then be ill. It was quite a stark conversation to have with a little girl who's age 9. But that was a conversation we had. And I said to her, there are other people, Christy, who have nothing at all wrong, but they're trapped. They can never leave their home because their mind is worried and troubled and they feel trapped in their space at home. I said, so you see, Christy, the most powerful thing you have is your mind, because your mind can either free you or it can contain you. And she looked at me and she said, who's that man who talks with that machine? He's in a wheelchair and he speaks through that funny box. I said, oh, Stephen. She said, Stephen Hawkins, that's it. She said, he's written a fabulous book about time. She said, Mom, I'm going to be like him. I am not going to let this condition spoil my life. I am going to still do the things I want to do. I'll just have to find a different way to do them. And I said, that's the ticket, Christy. It is going to be different. Your life is going to be different. And we are going to find challenges. But you can achieve whatever you want to achieve. And that young lady grew up with that attitude. She did wheelchair basketball. She went to university. All the time as a mom, I found I was battling opinion, the view that this condition was a condition that should constrain her life. Why is she going to university? Why are you letting her go? Is she safe to go? And I used to say to people, it doesn't attack her mind. And we can find a way to support her. You have to let her live. But then I had other children. How was I going to help those children to not have survivor guilt, to get on with their lives? How was I going as a mother to not make our lives be overcrowded by Christy and all the issues that she would have? You know, I had by now 4 other children who also deserved to live a life that allowed them to be. And as a mom, those were very difficult challenges for me to juggle. Not to mention, I was not going to give up my career or work, because We needed money more than ever now. She needed wheelchairs, we needed home adaptations. There were so many things to think about. I could talk forever about the challenges that we faced. What I will say to you is that Christy was a happy young woman. She was very well aware of her condition, but she didn't let it rule her life. So let's fast forward now to 19, no, let's fast forward to about 4 years ago. And by now her condition really was severe. We had care packages, we had carers coming in. She was in a wheelchair. She was terribly, terribly restrained by her muscles. Her hearing was affected, her sight was affected, her swallowing was affected. She lost her ability to paint. And all the time we battled medical opinion. I couldn't get them to listen to me on occasion. And it meant that Christy suffered things that she didn't need to suffer. And when they made us wait for appointments or for treatment, or when they denied what we were saying, she just got worse. And so February 2019, Christy became really poorly. And we'd got her into hospital. And they said her kidneys were affected now, and they wanted to stop her heart medicine. And I said, please don't do that, because if you do that, it's really going to send her into heart failure. And there has to be a better way. Can you please talk with each other? Kidney team, speak to heart team, come up with a treatment pathway together. They didn't. They kicked us out of hospital. And it took me 8 days to get her back. And when we got her back into hospital, that was the end of her life, really. We had 6 weeks together with her. And Christy was prepared for that time. She had written letters that she'd hidden at home. She told me where to find them. She'd written her will. She had said what she wanted her funeral to be. And she said to me that she was ready to die. She said to the doctors, every time I come here, you don't listen. And when I go home with less than I came. And really the quality of my life is so diminished now that I've had enough. So we moved to a hospice and we spent 15 days in that hospice. And when she moved there, it was the day of her 29th birthday, the exact day. And I went home and I fetched her artwork, her poetry, her degree certificate, her favourite cushions, her photographs that she had hanging all around her little house that we built for her, right on our driveway, so she was right there. And I went back to the hospice room and I just I didn't ask permission, I just bustled in with all of this stuff and hung it everywhere with command strips. And when the doctors walked into that room, they just stood and looked around, and it meant that Christy had the last 15 days of her life talking about what she'd done, her poems, her art. It wasn't a room of death. It was a room of achievement. It was a room of celebrating all that she'd done. And when she eventually did die, her last day, I got up from my chair where I'd slept at night and walked across, and I knew she was going to go that day. And I phoned her brothers and sister, my mum, my husband, her stepmother. Her own father had already died, unfortunately, but her stepmother, her stepsister. And we all sat as a community around her. Hearing's the last thing to go. So we played all of her favourite films. We played her favourite music. And then, as these things do, her breathing became laboured, and we knew that time was now short. It was the evening now, and she died at 11:05 at night. Once she died, I asked the nurses what they were going to do, and they said they were going to leave her in the room. And I said, she can't be here alone. She hasn't been alone for the last 6 weeks. I would like to sleep with her tonight, please. And I'd like to wash her and I'd like to dress her. And, you know, I'm part Jamaican, so I'd got all of the lotions to rub into her body. And so that's what I did. Washed her with the nurses and creamed all of her body so she smelled beautiful, and put her favourite nightie on her. I thought it was the best thing. She was ever so comfortable in that nightie. And we made her bed. She was in that bed and I lay in the chair. And it was such a night of peace. You know, in her last 3 or 4 weeks, she had suffered terribly through the night, terribly. Such pain, such anguish, such flailing of her muscles as tremors and muscle spasms kicked in. You know, I'd spent nights with nurses trying to calm her legs to protect them from the sides of the bed. So it was terrible. But that night, it was peace. I slept, she slept. And when I woke the next morning, they came and took her away. And we cleared the room and went home, found the letters she'd asked me to find, gave them out to her brothers and sisters, distributed the things that she asked me to distribute, carried out her funeral wishes as she'd written them down. And we didn't exactly hold a wake. I put on an exhibition of all of her work and did lots and lots of flip photograph albums so that people who came could look through all these albums and find themselves with her. So that's my story of loss. Christy was an amazing young woman, and she was never fearful of what Friedreich's ataxia meant for her life. She lived in spite of it. And she taught me how to do the same. And in her memory, we do have Melting Ice Cubes Health now, because information was the thing that gave me confidence. It gave me a voice to challenge, check and challenge doctors, check and challenge educators, check and challenge different things in society. Because the only thing that mattered to me was that my daughter, whose life was going to be short, should live. And that's all that Christy wanted to do. She wanted to live the best life she could possibly have. She died with dignity. And I will spend the rest of my life helping people to have the same. And I thank you tonight for listening and allowing me to share my story.
Sylvia, thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your story with such love, such attention, such intention. It's clear the kind of mother that you have been. And we are all so honored and touched to hear your story and to hear the strength and the beauty and the celebration of Christy's life that you still carry within you. Thank you. I invite you now, Mulvia, to read for us this acknowledgement of the light going out in our lives as we extinguish our own candles here tonight. Again, folks, I invite you to read aloud with Mulvia, with yourselves on mute, as Mulvia reads this 3 times as we extinguish our candles.
By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive the memories of those we honour today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives. By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive the memories of those we honour today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives. By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive the memories of those we honour today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
For everybody, I want to say thank you so much. This has been indeed a night of transformation. I love what V said, that the wound is the portal. I think that's something we can all carry with us into our days and into our lives. It's a joy to be with all of you. May we continue the work of breaking down taboos, building culture, sharing love, and coming together at these important moments. Thank you, everyone who was here tonight. Stay well, be well, good night. Maybe as we close out, we can have a little bit of music on our way out. Thank you so much, Aditi.
devotional folk bhajan to all of those in India living with fear and grief and uncertainty. I pray for peace. This is a Sanskrit bhajan in the Malwa dialect, and it was sung by women in the heart of Mother India. Tam to gavira kaput gane shatam bina gadi nas de. Tam to bega bega aao gane shatam bina gadi nas de. Tam bin gadi nas de, o tam bin gadi nas de. Tam bin gadi nas de, o tam bin gadi nas de. Tam to ज्ञान भंडारा गने शतम बिन गड़ी नास दे. हम बिन गड़ी नास दे, ओ तम बिन गड़ी नास दे. तमरा सीस मोटेड़ा गने शतेले सिंदूर चढ़े. तेले सिंदूर चढ़े, ओ तेले सिंदूर चढ़े. तमरा दांत मोटेरा गने शसुआगन चुड़ेला पड़े. तामरी सूंड मोतेरी गने शवास गनागर में. वासग नागर में, ओ वासग नागर में. तामरी दूंद मोटेरी गने शसवामन मोदक चढ़े. सवामन मोदक चढ़े, ओ सवामन मोदक चढ़े. तम तो कवेरा का पूत गने शतम